And we are online. Hello, everyone. People joining now. Hello, Benno. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Maurice.
Happy to have you here. Where are you calling from, Dave? It's not New York. It's
North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina.
It's North Carolina. Yeah, that was the place, the city where you are flying to. We waited a minute until everyone is in, and then we are happy to start this journey. It will be a journey of ups and downs, but it will be for sure a safe landing. It will be for sure a safe landing. Welcome everybody who are now joining. Welcome in this 25th already power webinar, the last one before a little summer holiday, summer break. But after the summer break, we move on with more power webinars. This one is called the Hudson Miracle. What happened was in 2009 on the 5th of January, and we have here Dave Sanderson, the last passenger who got off that miracle plane. And we have Benno Baksteen here, former captain of KLM 747-777, and he's a bit the Sully. That was the name of of the captain who flew the Miracle in New York, but he's a little bit of the Sully of the Netherlands, because he knows everything about the safety in the flight industry, and we support at the moment the flight industry, who is having a very hard time, and we hope that more people just buy tickets again to fly again to the beautiful places in the world. That's for sure. That's why we also organize this power webinar for just support the whole flight industry. Well, let us start. Dave Sanderson, we met each other. I think was it 2 months ago?
Correct. Correct.
To one of my business partners in Vancouver, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. For sure she's also joining this webinar. For people who don't know you, and I know you because I met you, and you have not only one story to tell, you have more stories to tell. So tell me, we dive into your life story. I would love to share it with the people. Who is Dave Sanderson? Tell us more.
Well, thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Benno. I'm really honored to be here around the world today. I'm very blessed to be able to even have this interaction. As you know, January 15, 2009, I was one of those people that boarded a plane that do everything that you just normally do. You don't think about it. And then all of a sudden, within 60 to 70 seconds, something changes your life, not only for that moment, but for the rest of your life. I was a salesperson for 30 plus years. That's what I did. I traveled consistently initially, back in the early mid 80s, locally and regionally. But then as I grew my career, I started traveling more domestically around the United States and Canada, and then internationally. So I was traveling quite often. I was in technology sales, where I was gone 3 or 4 days a week. So I had nothing unusual about being on a plane. I was on a plane, and like most people, and I'm sure some of you who are listening and watching in didn't pay attention when I got on a plane. Nothing unusual. Nothing ever happens on a plane. You get on, you do your thing, you don't pay attention to the flight attendants. So it was just a normal day that day, and I wasn't supposed to be on that plane, as you know, Maurice, that day. I was scheduled to be on the 5 o'clock flight. So I think I was supposed to be on that plane for a reason. But so I've got a wife and 4 kids. I travel quite often. So, that week I actually started in Sarasota, Florida. Then we went to Petersburg, Virginia to do a little more systems checks. I was in technology, and our third stop that week was in Brooklyn, New York. That's how I got to New York. And that day, it was in Fahrenheit degrees. It was 11 degrees. It was very cold, but that's nothing unusual for New York City in the middle of winter. That's nothing unusual. And we were working in a distribution center in Brooklyn, and people who work in manufacturing or distribution understand this, but distribution centers are open quite early in the morning because the trucks that come start early in the morning. So we wanted to be there when all the action was going on. So our day started about 5 a.m. Eastern time. So we got, normally days start at 8 or 9 o'clock, but we got in early because we wanted to be in the middle of all the action, so we could actually do what we were supposed to do. So we worked for about 5 to 6 hours doing what we were going to do. So we got done early. And, when I get done early, my goal is to get home early because I travel so much. So that's why that morning, about 10 o'clock that morning, we got done. I quickly called our corporate travel agent and worked with her, and she put me on flight 1549.
Before you go on that flight.
Yes.
Who is Dave before that flight? Who was Dave as a little child?
Yep. I was actually going to circle back around to that. So, I grew up in the Midwest of the United States. I grew up in farm country. I was very athletic, so I played sports all the time. I was in Boy Scouts. So I did and I know maybe some people who are not from the United States may not understand this term, but the all-American boy. I was just growing up and having a good time. And, my father got transferred to Virginia when I was in 7th grade. So I had to start my life back over. So I had sort of two different lives. I had my youth life where I was in the Midwest, and then I was in Virginia. And Maurice, that's how I got to the East Coast, is my father got transferred. But, I was still doing a lot of athletics. I was very active in school. And I went to college and university, a place called James Madison in Virginia. And, my goal was to play football, but unfortunately I hurt my knee, so I couldn't play football. My dad, Maurice, was a very wise man. He said, you better get a college education because you're not going to play sports. So he was a very wise man you look back on it, you didn't want to hear that. But, I've been very blessed, as you know, Maurice, with people in my life who have given me great guidance and mentorship. And that's one of the things I talk about now, one of the things I'm passionate about, because fortunately for me, I've had my mother, my father were my first mentors. But shortly after that, when I got my first job, I got transferred to where I am right now in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I worked for a restaurant chain called Howard Johnson. And it was a hotel restaurant, right? Best known for clams and ice cream. And I was a second assistant manager, so I was the low man on the totem pole. I was the apprentice. But fortunately for me, because fortunately at that time, I was working second and third shift. And we had somebody that would come in every night. His name was Bill, and he would come in and he wore a flannel shirt and drove a pickup truck. And most people who think of the southern United States think like just a good old boy, right? But this gentleman owned 80 movie theaters in North and South Carolina. And he took me under his wing. And he started teaching me these things over the next 14-year period. I didn't know what I was learning, but he was giving me these life lessons. So my background is I've always been blessed to be around people who have taken interest in me and have helped me get to where I'm at and teach me things so I'm prepared to handle what life throws at you. And that's one of those things, as we talk about a little later on about what happened on the plane that day. Mm-hmm. I was very blessed to have somebody and people in my life to be able to give me what I call those moments that mattered in my life that helped me be prepared for what was about to happen in my life.
And that person was like a Sam Walton?
His nickname was the Sam Walton of Charlotte, where you would never know who this gentleman was because he's just an everyday guy, but he was one of the wealthiest men in Charlotte, North Carolina, and no one knew who he was. And I didn't know who he was for several months until all of a sudden I found out. It's like, I'm blessed. Someone put someone in my life who actually lived a life and had to grow a business back in the 1930s during the Depression. And fortunately for him, he had somebody called a mentor in 1929 that gave him guidance. Mm-hmm. So I'm very blessed to be able to take that lineage, that history, to be able to share it going forward like he did with me.
Mm-hmm. And there was another story because he gave you something shortly before he died.
Right.
And tell us what happened then.
So in 1997, my mother had just passed away, and being the eldest son, my sister and I had to put together the arrangements. So my mind was not really together, I would say. I was going in 15 different directions. So when I got back to Charlotte after the funeral, he called me to his office. And he was in his 80s at that point. And he had a beautiful office, but I got there, and first thing he told me is he had lung cancer. He smoked a couple packs of cigarettes a day, and he had lung cancer. And so I knew that probably he wasn't going to be around much longer. But he walked over to his desk. He had a beautiful big old desk, and pulled these pieces of paper out and sat down next to me and gave them to me. He said, "This is what I've been teaching you." And these were actually the handwritten notes that his mentor gave to him in 1929. He handwrote those notes, and he was giving this to me. And his last words to me before we departed was, "Don't let this die with you."
Wow.
So he basically gave me the charge to take this forward. And
of course you did. You directly did and started to.
Unfortunately, I did, Maurice. I put them away. As you know, I told you the story. I put them away, and
that's about it.
I didn't look for them. And all of a sudden, when I was writing my book, Moments Matter, I found these notes. And this has been my mission over the last 4 years, is now to put this all together so I can impact and help teach these things that he taught me. My goal is to teach this to 1 million people in the next 10 years. So we're going to we made a big goal. So now that's my mission.
Now it's your mission. But what happened before? In 10 years, you were director of security of Tony Robbins, because we spoke a little bit about last weekend.
That's right. I was very blessed. After Bill passed away, I was on Tony Robbins' security team, and then he asked me to be his assistant head of security in 1997. And then a couple years later, he asked me to be the head of security for his team. So I was very blessed. When one mentor passed on, another mentor came into my life. And I think if you stay awake and stay aware, these things do happen. But most people, as you know, Maurice and Benno, most people don't see these things. They go through life. And that's one of the things I want to teach people is you got to stay aware and awake, because these things come into your life, especially right now during this worldwide pandemic. There are people out there. What you're doing and what Benno's doing is extremely important, because there's people out there looking for people to help them through this. And what we're doing today, hopefully, will help at least one person be able to help them get through what's going on in their lives right now.
Yeah, and you're also a people's person like me. And what moved me a lot that you were sharing, one of the first persons who called you in the hospital after the accident was Tony Robbins. Yeah.
He was the only one that called me that night in the hospital.
The only one.
The only one that called me that night.
Unbelievable. Yep. Thank you for having you. And we experienced this flight back after we introduced Benno. For the people who just joined us, thank you for having you in this webinar. In my last webinar before summer break. Feel free in 10 minutes to share your questions if you have them for both people. I will share the question to Dave or Benno. Benno Baksteen, yeah. We know each other for a longer time than 2 months. I think from the beginning of I think you experienced also the start of the Speakers Bureau. You know my father, and I still remember your first speech. I was, I think it was in La Butte restaurant nearby, and you were just sharing the story why flying is much more safer than driving on the road. And people know you in the Netherlands. You're you are a celebrity in the Netherlands. When there is something going on in the flight industry, it's Benno on TV because he really shows that a support to the whole flight industry. He was captain before. Thank you for having you. But do I know more about you when you were a child, Benno? Tell me more about it, because what's your passion for the flight industry? Where did it start? Tell us.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for sharing your very interesting life story. I'll keep it shorter because my life is less interesting, maybe. I was born in Rotterdam, and I was always fascinated by transportation, be it boats or trains or planes. And actually, I wanted to become a sea captain when I was in high school. But halfway through high school, I joined a course, a glider course, glider airplanes. And I was fascinated. I was only 16 years old, and I was allowed to go up in the air after a couple of days on my own and pilot that plane. It was really amazing. And so I got hooked on aviation. And as a matter of fact, North Carolina is where aviation was born, Dave. Yeah, that's a nice connection again. Yeah. Anyway, so I joined after the high school. I joined the government flight training school, and I did some military service with the Navy, flying naval aircraft. Very interesting. Lucky I survived because you do some dangerous things on flying low over the sea, doing exercises with ships and being shot at for gunnery training and everything. Actually, they were shooting at the targets we pulled behind us, but sometimes they were a bit off track with shooting. Anyway, and then I joined KLM, and that's what I did for about 36 years. And I never was, luckily, in a crash like you did, Dave. But I was lucky, I guess, and we did have some interesting flights, of course, over the 36-year period. But what I learned was that the things that make aviation safe are a little bit different from what the rest of the world does. So when I retired, I was asked to head a government advisory panel on flight safety. And that branched out into other areas, other domains. We are doing things different, not because we are smarter than other people, because we are not. But when things go wrong in an airplane, you do things wrong, quite often you die. So it's a big incentive to learn from what you do wrong. Even if it's an unwelcome message, you have to really look at what you're doing, really accept some thorough analysis, and that's what we do. And basically what makes aviation safe is three things. It's first to try to prevent bad things from happening, but you can do it only up to a certain point. And then you need what we call redundancy. Like for instance, if you lose one engine, it's no problem. Aircraft is built to cope with that. The pilots are trained to cope with that. It's no problem. It's redundancy. And that goes for all the systems in an aircraft. And finally, you still have some remaining issues, and for that you need resilience. And that comes from the people, well-trained, well-taught people. And that's what, and overall, you learn to manage risk. And that's the biggest part. That's the most interesting part, because risk is always a part of your life. Without risk, life is not possible. We now live in a society that's pretty much risk-free, although you wouldn't say so with the COVID crisis, of course. But because of the little exposure to risk in the rest of society, some people think they have the right to be absolved from every risk. And that's not possible. So you have to learn to accept a certain amount of risks, but you have to know what you accept. And you have to feel confident that if the risk materializes, that you will be able to cope. You know, you won't be able to do it every time. But as your crash showed, in very exceptional cases where everything is set to go wrong, the resilience still will manage to save the day with spectacular results, even miraculous results in your case. So I really look forward to hear your story. Of course, I read the accident report, but it's totally different when you were actually inside the aircraft.
Thank you, Benno. I think you've flown for 35, 36 years?
Yeah, all in all 40 years altogether, with the training included. Yeah.
Do you think from your start flying until what it is now, it's much safer now to fly?
Safety has improved over time. It always does. Only it becomes the increments, the improvements become smaller and smaller over time because you've covered so much ground already. So you'll be very happy to keep it as it is, because when you're very safe, that's a risk in itself. Because a lot of people think it's safe automatically, and they let go. Like what you now see with the COVID crisis, people think, oh, nothing is happening, so we're safe, so we can resume normal operation. No, you can't. You have to keep your eyes open and keep watching for problems and keep training. And that's difficult because there's always cost involved, there's always time involved. And when nothing goes wrong on the surface, people say, we can cut the costs, we can cut on the training, but you can't. You have to invest, you have to keep it going.
I know myself, and you know that my wife Gwen is flying for a very long time, 20 years now. KLM is doing very good on safety. I know what she has to learn every year, again and again. And even now, it's safety. It's number one for them. Let us come back to that day, the 5th of January, 2009. I think when I think of the president, it was Bush, was it? Was he? So
yeah, President Bush. The next week, the new president was going to be inaugurated. That's correct.
So it was 9/11, and this. We will bring you back. So I would ask you to mute and just to share a part of the movie and experience it again, and then we hope to hear from Dave how he experienced that day. So please mute.
Hello, Donna.
Captain.
Altimeter is verified. 3023.
3023.
Cactus 1549, gate 21, clear to push, spot 28, ground for taxi. Clear for takeoff.
Cactus 1549, clear for takeoff. Get over how beautiful it is up here.
Life's easier in the air.
Yes, it is. We got both of them rolling back.
Double check your seatbelts, please.
Ignition start. My aircraft.
Your aircraft.
Mayday, this is Cactus 1549. We've lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards the LaGuardia.
We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
Airspeed, optimum 300 knots. We don't have that.
We may end up in the Hudson.
I have an emergency. I got an A320 diving for the river. If you can, you got runway 29 available at Newark.
I don't think we can make any runway.
Thrust levers, confirm, idle.
Idle.
Okay, what do you need to land?
Sorry, we're too low.
Obstacle, obstacle. Obstacle, obstacle. Pull up.
Clear of conflict.
This is the captain. Brace for impact.
What? Brace! 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 Heads down! Stay down!
Too low. Terrain.
Brace! 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 Heads down! Stay down!
Off your right side is Teterboro Airport.
No reload after 30 seconds, and your master 1 and 2 confirm off.
Off.
Heads down! Stay down!
You can land runway 1 Teterboro.
We can't make it. We're going to end up in the Hudson.
Sorry, say again? Radar contact lost.
All right, let's put the flaps out.
Flaps out.
Come on, talk to me.
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain.
150 knots.
Going down. Going down.
Terrain, terrain. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
Yeah.
It's silence, of course, Dave. And you experienced the real story.
Yep.
And you were not supposed on that flight.
No.
You were just thinking, take an earlier flight to be back to my family a little bit earlier.
That's correct. That's correct. I wasn't supposed to be on the flight. I was scheduled to be on the 5 p.m. flight that night. I always booked, because of business, the last flight out, because you never know how the day's going to go in business. So I was very excited. I gave up my first class seat. I was a first class on 5 o'clock flight for seat 15A on that flight. So I was 4 rows behind that left wing as this was going on. And as you know, typical passenger, I didn't pay attention. I flew 100 times a year, and Benno probably realizes this. Passengers don't pay attention to the flight attendants. They know everything. And I thought I knew everything likewise. So it wasn't anything abnormal until about 60 to 70 seconds into the flight is when I heard that explosion. And it was a loud explosion. I had never heard anything on a plane like that before. So that's what really got my attention. You know, I sort of looked up, and since I was in seat 15A, I was 4 rows behind the engine. I saw the engine explode and saw the fire coming out beneath the left wing. But as Benno said originally, I think he's spot on. Captains and first officers are used to flying on one engine. They can fly on one engine. And I think that's, you know, my initial thought process is I've flown so often, I know there's 2 engines on the plane. So we're just going to go back to the airport. And I think that's one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot. That's why I always bring it up, is one of the extraordinary things about this is those birds hit almost simultaneously, because you only heard one explosion, one boom. And I truly believe, this is for me personally, if we would have heard multiple booms, multiple explosions in New York, there might have been a different thought process.
Yeah.
I think at that point it would have been a little crazy. But I think the passenger makeup of that plane that day was 90% business people. So I think everybody was thinking, we're just going back to the airport. So as he started,
about the birds, those were not small birds.
No, they were Canadian geese. They were really large birds. And you know, I in the museum in Charlotte, I've seen a replica of these Canadian geese.
Canadian geese. Yeah, Colleen is also joining us, so she's Canadian. Thank you, Canada.
She probably has some in her backyard right now. But yeah, I'm sure Benno's been out of LaGuardia. As you start banking, you know, as you're going back to the airport, you bank one way, but all of a sudden we were banking the opposite way. And you know, I've been to LaGuardia quite often, so I know the territory, the terrain. So as he was banking and I was looking out the window, all of a sudden I looked out and I saw the skyline of Manhattan. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, I've never seen it up close. And that sort of got my attention. I started asking, what's going on? Because that's not how you go back to LaGuardia. I know you go back the other way, to LaGuardia. And then as we started going down further and further, and all of a sudden you could see the George Washington Bridge getting bigger and bigger. And I had not seen, of course, I didn't know at that point it was the George Washington Bridge. I found out later it was. But as we started crossing over the bridges, when the captain said his famous words, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And as we were crossing over the bridge, I think the movie did a pretty good job. The Airbus only cleared the bridge by roughly 400 feet. And the bridge was roughly 600 feet up. So we're at roughly 1,000 plus or minus feet going down at that point. And that was the moment that really, I think, got my attention, because like, okay, all I now see is water. And the only thing I remembered about seeing planes and water is when they're toppling through the water. And I just kept thinking, this is not good. This is not going to turn out well. And that's when I immediately did what I did, and I started praying. Because at that point, you know, I tell people, I'm writing in my new book, the only thing as you can control is your mind. The captain and first officer, they can control other things. I can control my mind. And knowing, as Maurice, I'm glad you brought up my time with Tony Robbins, because that's one of the things he teaches and taught me, is how to control your mind and your state when you're in those stressful situations. And fortunately for me, I knew how to do that. So I started getting my mind right, but you're still 60 seconds away from impending tragedy. And people ask me a lot.
For the people, just share us from the moment. I think the captain shares something to the audio. When was that moment after you heard something was blown up? You saw the engine, but how did the communication of the captain?
The captain, and I think the captain did an extraordinary job. He should get all the credit, because he said the minimal amount of words, but he said the words he needed to say. And I learned that. I think that was a great lesson for not only me and everybody else on that plane, but people who are in a trying or stressful situation. Don't overtalk. Tell people what they need to know, and prepare them so they don't get too out of sorts or too excited. I think that had a lot to do with people maintaining their minds and not going out of sorts. I think that was a critical at that moment in time. And you know, I'm sure that he had other things to worry about than talking to the passengers. People ask me that all the time. So I think he's got other things to worry about, you know. So fortunately for me, he and the first officer worried about those things. And so at that point in time, we just had cleared the bridge. And now, as Benno can probably explain a lot easier than I can, to clear the bridge, he got over the bridge, but then he had to put the nose down to get more speed to keep it going as long as he could. So when he put the nose down, that's when we started descending into the water. And you know, the movie didn't represent it the way it was, but that river was 36-degree water, so Fahrenheit. So that there was a lot of ice in the river likewise. And another thing that a lot of people don't realize is, you know, this happened at roughly 3:27 to 3:30 in the afternoon, and the ferries start doing their runs approximately that time. So fortunately, there were no ferries in the river at that time, because you know, he had, as Benno will probably attest, he basically had 4 options he could take. He could try to go back to LaGuardia, which wasn't a good option. He could go to Teterboro, which was on the right, but there were a lot of large buildings, and that wasn't a good option. He could have turned around the other way and gone into the ocean. That's not a good option. So he was down to one option, basically, which is not an option. It's what you're going to do. And fortunately, the ferries were not in the river, because I truly believe if there were ferries crossing, he wouldn't even have that option. This could have been a whole different situation. But you know, as we're going down, I tell people that people ask me all the time, what's that last moment like? And as you saw in the movie, I think it was accurate. There's some people that were texting, some people were calling. To me, I just saw the movie of my life pass before my eyes. It's really amazing when you think you're going to die in the next 60 seconds, what all of a sudden you understand what your life is all about. You see your life. And that's what happened to me, because 60 seconds from that point is when we crashed into the river. And it was a hard hit. And as we know now, he hit it perfectly. And once again, Benno will tell you this as a captain. And I've just learned this by all the opportunities I've had, and blessed to be to talk to the captains and first officers. I get that option now. But they want to know my story. And they tell me 1 degree either way, you're either toppling into New York or toppling into Newark, New Jersey. And that could have been a bigger situation than 9/11. This is rush hour in New York. Can you imagine a plane toppling through Manhattan? So he hit it perfectly. He and the first officer get all the credit because they get it perfectly. But like it even said in the movie, that's when it just started. That's when it just started, because now you got a plane in the river and water's coming in immediately. So by the time I looked back up and looked out the window and I did see light, I knew I was alive. Water started coming in immediately, and I was towards the back of the plane. And
that moment, Dave, that moment that you thought, okay, I'm still alive, and so were the 154 other people next to you.
Right.
Nobody got injured. Yeah.
Well, there are a few injuries, but nobody had fatal injuries or critical injuries. The flight attendant, as we know, Doreen in the back took the biggest hit. She's the one who sliced her leg, and she's the one who had, I think, the most devastating injury of all of us. So fortunately, she got out early. She got out to the front left early. So fortunately, that was really blessing. But she was immediately knee to waist deep in the water, immediately. And this is 36-degree water.
Okay.
So this is not
cool.
Everyday nice warm water like we have in summer.
We have here in Holland. His name is Wim Hof, and he likes to be in the ice all the time. He's called the Iceman. But not at that moment. Not at that moment, Dave. No.
He can have it. He can have it all, because I've experienced that. But as you may know, when you're in that situation and the adrenaline's going, you don't feel anything. You don't feel, and that's what the EMTs kept telling me when I was in the triage there. How they were amazed that I survived being in the water for 7 minutes. But it was adrenaline. So
before we go further. Going to Benno, this is a miracle, of course. Having this, what's your opinion about this as a captain? Because I know in the cockpit there's another world than at the back.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've seen the clip several times now, and each time again it gives me the goosebumps because I can really relate to being there. I have been there. Luckily not in that situation, but you see the decision you make. You have to realize what's happening. That takes a few seconds. You have to realize we lost all engine power, so we have not many options left. One lousy option, which is putting it down in the Hudson, which is a lousy option, but it's the only one, like Dave said. So you don't have to think twice about it. It's just what you're going to do, period. And that's what he did. And he did that. He really did a great job because, like Dave said, this could have ended easily so much differently because water landings are very dangerous. And you can easily, with a little bit of bang, you can hit a wingtip into the water, then you cartwheel, and it's over. Everybody will die, or most people will die. And you could have hit obstacles or boats, and luckily there were no boats in the flight path. If there were, they would have tried to avoid them, but they wouldn't have many options to do that because they couldn't bank all that much. And
you cannot train it to land on the water.
No, that's what you don't do. There's a drill, you have the exercises, but that's all premeditated. You call this ditching. And then you prepare the aircraft, you prepare the passengers, but this was all happening so fast. You just had to do it. There was no time for preparation at all. So it's really a crash landing on water. And like I said, it's you have to maintain your speed. So you have a sink rate it's about at least twice your normal sink rate. Normally, you go down a 3-degree flight path at about 700 feet per minute. And in this case, they were doing at least 1,500 feet a minute going down. So that is the first thing that makes it difficult. You have to take that downward speed out before you hit the ground normally, and you do that normally, and especially before you hit the water. Because if you hit the ground pretty hard, you have the landing gear to absorb the shock. But on the water, the shock directly hits the airframe. And so it needs to be as gentle as possible. And it's difficult. When you're going down fast, you have not as many references as when you approach the runway. It's water without any features at all. So it's difficult to judge your height. So you have to start at the right time. And he did a great job because he brought back the sink rate to the normal, a little bit less than a normal sink at about 700 feet.
And it's showing a great leadership, of course. He made a decision within seconds, and of course, maybe with Angel, the right decision.
Yeah, it was absolutely the right decision. It made it just in a split second. The whole crew was working very well together. The cockpit crew was, and afterwards also from what I've seen and heard, the cabin crew as well. And but what happened on the impact, and that was what David was referencing to, the force was still that great that the aft part of the fuselage broke in pieces at some places, and that's why a lot of water entered immediately. And like Dave said, it's 36 Fahrenheit. I learned in the Navy you survive only a couple of minutes in that temperature, only a couple of minutes. And like it must have been your adrenaline that kept you going. You have to get out of that as soon as possible. So that's the final part that made it a miracle, that everybody was able to get out so fast. Some jumped into the water, were able to climb back onto the wing or whatever there was. And then the ferries came. So that's but the basic feat is decision making, and the execution was, given the circumstances, it was absolutely top.
Yeah, how was that leadership, personal leadership? It was on your side. There was no crew member, so it was only you. Did you decide? Did you make the decision? Okay, I will help other people and let me go as last person. What was your, and what was that also a connection with Tony Robbins? And sorry, people in the chat, I see some people from Canada, like Colleen, but also Becky. Sorry about the birds, Dave. But we don't worry about what happened with the birds at that moment.
Yep.
No, but again, then was the moment, okay, to get off the airplane.
Right.
What happened?
So my game plan, as I was putting it together, was just get to the aisle, get up, and get out. And that was just my constant reference in my head: aisle up, out, aisle up, out. But when I got to the aisle, it was my turn. I heard my mother start talking in my head, and she had passed away in 1997. But what I heard her tell me is something she told me when I was a child, and it was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And that gave me a lot of certainty at that point in time that, you know, but the great thing is she made me make the decision. In my mind, I could go, but I knew I was alive. So that's why I climbed over the seats towards the back of the plane to see if anybody needed help. And when I got to the back, everything was moving pretty well. And the water was around somewhere between waist and chest deep back in the back at that point in time. We're 2 to 3 minutes into this thing now. So I got behind everybody else and started making my way out just like everybody else. And you got to remember, this is late afternoon in the winter in New York, and you're in the back of the plane. So it was pretty dark in the back of the plane. It wasn't really a lot of sunlight and light. You could see, but it wasn't really that bright. And based on the impact, and of course, people had luggage underneath the seats, luggage was floating into the water. So you were every time I took a step, I hit something with my leg, and of course, I didn't know what it was, but the first light that I saw was on the right side at 10F. The door was open and people were already out. I was like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. It's time to go. But then I started to get out, and I looked up, and it was an amazing sight to me, because I looked out on the wing, and the wing was filled with people standing on a wing. Then I looked to the right, and there was this little lifeboat. Of course, it comes out once the plane gets down, and people were already filled up in the boat. So there was no place for me to go. So that's why I was inside the plane roughly 7 minutes, waist deep, 36-degree water.
7 minutes.
And then, but the ferries were already there. I say that's a miracle. Ferries were there within 2 to 3 minutes. It was amazing how quickly they got there. But people started yelling at me, hold on, and I didn't know why at that moment. But what happened is that the river, if you know anything about the Hudson River, I learned a lot about it. It's got a very fast current, and that plane was actually floating down the river. So as the plane was floating, the lifeboat was floating out into the river, and they, like I and probably many people who are listening, who reads the instructions? No one pays attention to the flight attendants. I didn't. It's actually tethered to the plane, but no one knew that. So that's why I was holding on to this little lifeboat waist deep in that 36-degree water, because I had leverage in the plane. I could hold on to the plane and hold on to the lifeboat. And it just happened to be, Maurice, the first picture that I saw when I was on Good Morning America was a picture of me holding on to the lifeboat inside the plane, waist deep in the water. So that's why I became the last passenger out. And I didn't even know if I was or not until that day when I was on Good Morning America and saw that picture.
And then tell us further, because that moment changed your whole life.
Yep. So what happened was 6 or 7 minutes passed while all this was going on, and all of a sudden I felt the plane shift. And what happened, I found out later, I didn't know that happened then, is the reason it shifted is because one of the boats in the rescue on the right side of the plane, as they were backing out, they just touched the front of the plane and just shook it. And the only thing that I could think of when a plane shifts, it's going down. Because the only thing I can remember is Titanic. When that boat went down, I'm like, I don't want to be inside of a plane that's going down. So that's when I jumped in and swam to the closest boat that I could find, which was the end of that wing. And I tell people that was the longest 10-yard swim I've ever had in my life, because I've been in the water for 6 or 7 minutes. Now I'm in the water fully to swim with my clothes on. And one of the things that people don't realize, and if you're in New York or New Jersey, you do, but that river's not that clean. And I got jet fuel in my eye, which we didn't know until later. I got back. I had black spots in my eye. That's why you see me wearing glasses today, because and that night I had a hard time seeing out of my eye. And what happened was they cleaned my eyes out when I got to the hospital, but I found out that I got jet fuel in my eye from the swim. And that's why, it was amazing. I got there, but now I get to the ferry and they're yelling at me to climb. And I yelled up, I can't. And then I heard my mom again, because the word my mom hated most was can't. If you grew up in our house, Maurice, my mom, if you said that to my mom, she'd knock you down a peg. She didn't believe in that word. So fortunately, I got one arm up, and then somebody grabbed it, got the other arm up. 2 men who I still today don't know who they are grabbed me and pulled me on that ferry and threw me over the side. And that's how I got on the ferry. And now they're screaming at me to get up. So I got up, and I'm like, I made it. I made it. But that was my moment, Maurice and Benno. That was my moment, because as we were talking about, you can go all day on adrenaline. But when the adrenaline's gone, I was so cold. Air temperature was roughly 11 degrees. Water temperature was roughly 36 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was so cold. I could barely breathe. But fortunately, somebody had a phone and put it in my face, and that's how I got a message to my family. I couldn't dial it, but the only thing I could get out is, "This is your dad. I've been in a plane crash." And that's the only thing I could get out, because I was so cold. It's hard. Your buddy who makes ice sculptures in the water could probably attest, but when you're that cold, you just can't even think. Your mind's going 15 different directions, and that's what was happening to me at that moment in time.
Amazing. So it felt like the Titanic. It felt
it's going down
next to the Titanic.
It's going down.
It's amazing. We have 15 minutes to go now. I really want to go to that. Okay, the fear of flying. A lot of people suffer from that, of course. But you got that fear, of course, and I think a lot of people in the airplane and Benno. I think these are the few times that this happens in the flight industry. To tell us more about that part. To
me or Benno?
Benno.
Yeah, well, fear of flying, of course, is not a logical thing. It's an emotional thing, so it's very difficult to address. And it's really heartening to hear that Dave did not develop fear of flying. We talked about this a little bit before the webinar, and he's still not afraid to fly. And I commend him for that, because that takes a real effort to absorb what happened to him and not let it influence your life. Because that's what it does. If you live by your fear, you cannot live a full life. So it's very, but it's emotional, and it doesn't help when I explain that it's extremely safe. Only 1 in the 3 million flights in the Western world ends in a crash, and even then, half the people on average survive that crash. So that doesn't really help. And I'm amazed nowadays with the COVID crisis, that people don't want to fly because of the fear of getting the disease, but they then head for their cars and drive across country for 3 days to reach its destination. And the risk they incur then is far larger than the risk that they would run of contracting COVID, because of the good ventilation in the aircraft, the face masks. So it's really a limited amount of risk, but that doesn't help to overcome your fear. Yet I think you should do it, because if we let fear run our lives, we'll end up in a mess. It's really, we see it happening right now. Yeah, but the only way to get over it is to develop trust again. And it starts with trusting yourself. Trust that you do the right things, that you avoid, and flying when you're, for instance, have symptoms. You shouldn't be in other people, of course. And if you trust each other to do that, then we can trust general society and get it running again.
This really reminds me with one of my stories. I love to fly. I love to connect with people from all over the world. I love to and of course my children 8 and 10. Sometimes you bring them on the airplane, and yeah, we went to Canada last year. So people from Canada, beautiful. It's just a beautiful country. We really enjoyed it. But I think a few years ago we also went with the 737 to Nice, to that part in south of France, and we were landing, and the plane did this, and I saw a lot of people in the airplane showing their fear. But you know what kids do? they start. My youngest started to laugh, and my oldest started to laugh, and the whole airplane were only laughing because our children were laughing. Our children were just getting out the fear away from all those people who were in fear. Something happened. But still, Dave, this happened with you and with those other passengers. How did you lose that fear? How did you jump on the airplane again? And when happened, was it 1 week or 2 weeks or maybe 1 month or 1 year?
So what happened to me is, fortunately, I was telling Benno this before we got on. I got on a plane the next day because U.S. Airways was basically telling me, taking care of me. And for me to get home, I got on a plane, but I wasn't thinking. My mind wasn't even concerning that. But fortunately for me, the captain and first officer on that plane wanted a one-on-one talk with me because they knew that I'd been on the plane. So that's what my first interaction with the captain was that next day. But I'm going to be very candid. The next week, my company asked me to fly to Michigan. And I did. I said yes. And I flew. At that time, I was flying U.S. Airways because they were based in Charlotte. But I got to fly to Michigan. I flew Delta. Now, I love Delta. But I was a rock star on U.S. Airways. No one knew me on Delta. So here I am. I'm in the back row of Delta on a little puddle jumper, and I have to admit it was a little dicey. I was a little like, oh my God, we're going up and down like that, like you were saying. But fortunately, somebody on the plane recognized me because I was on TV all the time, and the captain actually came back during the flight and sat next to me, and I had a one-on-one with the Delta captain, and we talked a little bit about it, which gave me great certainty once again that it's the safest way to fly. That's why I tell people if I have my choice, even right now. You're right, Benno. Right now, I mean, the air filtration on a plane is so clean right now, and the mask, there's no safer way to go than on a plane right now. I've actually flown 3 times in the last month. So I truly believe it's still the safest way. But yeah, it was, I have to admit, Maurice, the second flight was actually my toughest one because I was, once again, in the back of the plane, man. I didn't know, at least on U.S. Airways, I was in the front of the plane at that point forward,
So just do it and overcome your fear, and
you have to jump back on the horse. That's right.
Directly do it. So beautiful. My wife just came back from New York City. On Saturday, we are all living in a world where there's more fear in the world. What the future is going to bring. How do you both see that, Benno? How do you experience now, and of course the link with KLM? Dave, for us especially, changed his background in blue. It's not the KLM blue, but it's blue. It's better than green.
I did this for you, Benno. Yeah.
Thank you much, Dave. It's close but no cigar, though. But it's
right.
It's very much,
that's all I had to work with was this. Okay?
It's very much appreciated. Right. Yeah, well, it's you must be realistic with your fear, of course. Fear is not a, but the problem, the way to overcome it, to deal with, is to know a bit more, and we know a bit more now about the virus and everything. So we can do sensible things. In the beginning, you don't know what's hitting you. Now we know what it is, how it behaves, so we can really adapt and adjust. We're not going to overcome it. It's going to stay here for at least a year or so. We have to live with it, but we should really live with it, not hide from it, because we can do that. But we must be sensible, of course, and that in that respect, I'm
how do you see the flight industry? Because
oh yeah, that's a disaster. Of course, it's the hardest hit industry of all, because it's by definition is international. They have domestic, of course, but a large part of it, more than half of it, is international. And when you're domestic, you can do your own thing within your own country. But aviation, it has to cope with all the rules that all different countries impose. So you should see some harmonization, some lining up of rules, so that people know what they can expect. And some people don't dare to fly now, not for the flight, but because they're afraid that if they're away and there's a lockdown, they're not able to come back to their home country. So you should take that fear away, so that people know whatever happens, they're going to bring you back home anyways. Yeah, like we did in the past few months. So that should take away that fear. And
about COVID?
It's a long way back up. It's going to be very difficult. It will take at least a year. And aviation is it's not about the companies. It's about the infrastructure that aviation gives. And if we let that go, we'll disconnect the whole world, and that's going to cost us dearly. So we should stay connected. Despite all our differences, we should stay connected, and we should do sensible things from now on. I understand the panic from the beginning. The panic is very bad when you try to survive in an airplane, but also in society. So we should go back to what we know, what we can deliver, and we should accept limited amount of risks, acceptable amount of risk. We shouldn't offer no risk. For aviation, it will be very difficult. It's going to be harsh times. But we will get there, because the air connections, the Wright brothers started it, but it's here to stay. And it's really, like the founder of KLM said, the air ocean unites all peoples. And that's what it does, and that's what it brings. So we should continue flying. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, how do you experience it at the moment?
Yeah, I agree with Benno. I think that there are an acceptable amount of risk you can take right now, and I think that people need to get back. I mean, I'm really excited. I really want to fly KLM now. I need to figure out how to get to that part of the world so I can fly KLM, because I've been very blessed to be able to fly a lot of different airlines, and each airline has professionals that are amazing at what they do. And I've seen the professionalism from the captains all the way through the flight crew. And right now, I think all the airlines are doing the right thing. They're getting their air filtrations cleaned up. People wear a mask, and they're distancing people. So I believe right now, I agree with you, Benno. I think it's going to take probably 6 months to a year for it to come back, because this is the way the world's connected. And if we're going to grow the economies of the world, we need to be able to have the airline structure and infrastructure ready to go. And I think right now, people have to have the trust. They're doing everything they can to keep you safe, and not only safe in a plane, but safe physically and healthy. So I think that I agree with you, Benno. This is we all need to do our part if you have a chance to fly, and the countries need to make it a little bit more easy to be able to do that, and not put you in quarantine and things like that if you go someplace for 14 days.
We are, but in a few minutes, you wrote a book. You wrote more book than one book, Dave.
Yep, I was very blessed to be a part of A Brace for Impact, and then my book's Moments Matter, about all the moments that sort of led up to that point and how I used the moments in my life to be able to handle that situation that day. And my next book will be coming out here in the next 2 months, about how to really dig down in those moments and dissect for people. To look back in your life and how these moments are there for a reason, and be aware, because they can help you, as Benno knows, in times of crisis like we're in right now. We're going through a traumatic life experience, all of us. And there are lessons, and there's a way to have resilience to be able to go through it. This is my goal and my mission now, to help people understand that, and Bill's helped me be able to articulate that.
Yeah. Before I end with you, Benno has been retired now for...
I almost forget, 11 years now, yeah.
11 years, yeah. And I know the life of a captain is most of the time only in the air.
Yeah.
So how is your connection? Do you still remember when you you stopped flying and you were there more for your family?
Yeah, that was really a blessing, because flying is hell for your social life and for your family as well. So it's really great to be there for these special events like holidays and birthdays and everything. I'm not complaining, because it's part of the deal, but it's good to have it. And I'm not sad that I missed the time difference and everything. After about 3 months, it was like a fog lifted, because you're chronically tired from time differences. But that's also part of the game, no problem. But I love the life I had, and it gave me a lot of lessons. Like Dave said, it teaches you a lot about how to go through life and how to handle crisis and stuff. And that's what I share now. I do a lot of, not a lot, but I do some talking, some presentations, showing how aviation solves this crisis, how aviation becomes resilient by learning from things that go wrong, and how you can translate that to other areas. I cannot do the translation, you have to do that yourself, but I can show you how aviation does it, and maybe you can learn something from it. I think that's what Dave and I have in common. We share what we have experienced ourselves, but others have to pick up and make their own decisions and pull their own lessons out of it. We can only be there to help.
Beautiful, beautiful. Dave, that moment changed your life. I watched some videos of you, and again, you as well became very, very emotional sometimes, because it has changed your life. What means family for you at the moment?
Well, I think I'll leave you to this. I think that was one of the biggest revelations, like Benno just said, for me, is I traveled so much. I was away a lot of times, and I missed a lot of things, especially with my 2 older kids. And that's what I realized after this, is I was so focused on.
How old are they? How old are your kids?
They are now 28 and 26. So they were in high school at that point in time, and I missed a lot of their activities because I was so focused on what I thought a dad should do, and making money and making sure they had the life that they could have. But I realized what they really wanted was my time and my life. So that was the biggest shift that I made. Is I made a commitment that day when I got back, is I would never miss another one of my kids' activities, because I missed so many of them. And I've been pretty good. There are a few times when sometimes things happen, of course, that you just can't avoid. But that was the biggest change I made, Benno, is that I got to spend time with my family, and I would adjust my schedule to my family instead of their schedule to my schedule.
Yeah. Beautiful. Some last takeaways for the people? Benno?
No, I'll leave it to Dave. It's his story, and I'm just a sorry part, but I'll leave it to Dave.
Well, I as I say, thank you for having this, because I think it's important, especially right now, what's going on in this world. We're all going through this traumatic life experience called a pandemic, but there are lessons. There are people who have survived these things before and how to do it. And excuse me, I think Benno was spot on. It's all about risk assessment, and if you can handle the risk, you can live your life. But you cannot just go and hibernate. You have to go live your life right now, and assume some of the risk, and know that if you do the right thing, like my mother told me that day, more often than not, you're going to be able to always survive it. Hopefully add value to somebody else's life. And that's what I hope today, Maurice and Benno, we did, is add some value to somebody's life. So if they're going through a challenge, now they can realize, if they survived a plane crash and they can do this, what can I do? And I can get through this. And they know that they have people like us that they can call upon, that they can have conversations with to hopefully get them through it. So I'll leave you with that. I'm very blessed to be able to do these things, and God bless everybody.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Benno, for having you on this 25th. It's an anniversary number. 5 plus 2 is 7. It's a lucky number. My lucky number. So let's get the people in the airplane again. It's the best way to start your journey and to show the beauty of this beautiful planet. That's for sure. And to connect with all kinds of people from all over the world. And I hope that the flight industry is going to collaborate with other flight industries and help each other. and not just focus on their own story, but help each other. Air Canada, I saw a lot of people from Canada. Of course, Delta and KLM are already partners, but let's do it together and move forward, because yeah, people lose a lot of jobs in the flight industry and at the moment, and we all like to fly and have a beautiful life together. So again, Dave, thank you for having you. Benno, thank you for joining us at the very last minute.
My pleasure.
That I asked you. Thank you all the people who joined this webinar live, and I hope to see you again after summer break. I hope Kim can share the link to the website where we give the updates of other power webinars. But now, let's fly. Let's fly, no matter what, no matter what, no matter what. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone from all over the world. And it was a pleasure to do this with you. Bye-bye.